This is Mark Lane.
This is Robert Groden.
This is Dick Russell.
This is Jim Mars.
This is Lisa Pease.
This is Dr. David Mantic.
This is Cyril Weck.
This is Jim DiEugenio.
This is Joan Mellon.
This is David Lifton.
This is Jerry Policott.
This is Gary Shaw.
This is Bill Kelly.
This is Greg Burnham.
This is Gerald McKnight.
This is Sherry Feaster.
This is Joseph McBride.
This is Bill Davey.
This is Dave Ratcliffe.
This is David Talbot.
This is Doug Horn.
This is Walt Brown.
This is John Barber.
This is Bill Pepper.
This is Richard Belzer.
This is Oliver Stone.
This is Governor Jesse Ventura, and you're listening to Black Op Radio.
Video computers online. Archiving 44K. Initiate sequence.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Server connection confirmed.
T-minus 25 seconds.
Live stream 21 at 20K.
T-minus 20 seconds.
Phone lines are go.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Satellite uplink verified.
T-minus 10 seconds.
Flight check complete. Satellite uplink verified.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Black Op Radio, the voice of political conspiracy research. You're listening to Black Op Radio, the show NSA doesn't want you to hear. Now here is your host, Leno Sanek.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Black Op Radio. This is your host, Len Osanek. Today we are talking to longtime JFK researcher and author, Walt Brown. Hello, Walt.
Hi, Len, and hello to your always gracious audience.
There is going to be a trial in Houston coming up, and I know you wrote a very good book called The People v. Lee Harvey Oswald around 1992 era. It came out in paperback in 94 as well. I wanted to discuss that today. You've also done some other things. So before we get into the book, I want to make sure you have a chance to help publicize the things you were working on before, which is the latest book and then the chronology. For people not familiar with that, can you make a pitch for that, why people should pick those up?
Absolutely. For the longest time, and I'm sure this is true of you, and I'm sure it's true of many of your listeners, we all read everything that came out. What a lot of people were discovering is that we were reading a piece of a puzzle. And the time came when I finally said, I'm retired, I got nothing better to do, I'm going to put the puzzle together. And that was the birth of the chronology. I spent 7.5 years on it, and I took 40 days off in 7.5 years. And it came out to 30,000 pages with a 2,000-page annotated index. And I could guarantee anybody listening tonight, if they can read it, will find thousands of things that they were totally unaware of. And that's available from me. And what grew out of that was something called the Kennedy Execution, which is a 336-page book. It's the best, the closest I can get to what really happened. And I'd be glad to get with that on a eventual program after this trial that's coming up. But it has been an odyssey. It really has. And I'm looking forward to see what comes out of this trial, because I don't know how much you can accomplish in 2 days. And my understanding is that the purpose is to get some jurist in Texas to sign off on a legal finding that Oswald was innocent. And I can't imagine that any judge in Texas is going to do that. And more is a pity, but it is what it is. But People v. To lead into that was originally intended as my own personal closure. I'd spent from 1963 to 1991 doing everything I could possibly do, and I said, I've done everything I can do. I want to see what a case against Oswald would have looked like if you take away the drama of J.D. Tippit and the Warren Commission and their foolishness. Just boil it down to what happened. And I sat down and I did People v. Oswald. It's 652 pages. I did it in 10 weeks at night after work. And I finished it on a Friday, and I went to see the movie JFK the next day for the first time. And I just thought, that's a book. That little story that I just did for myself is a book. And I got it out there in the water, and it was purchased within 2 months, and it was published in the late summer of '92. And I think I told you in talking to you one time that I was in a bookstore looking for a mystery to read over a weekend, and I walked past People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, and I was just standing there stunned. That's my book. And it was an incredible feeling, and every time I go back to it, it's an incredible feeling. And to this day, I'm extremely proud of that book. And I think one of the biggest surprises that came out of it was it got excellent reviews from a number of law journals. And not being a lawyer, I thought that was pretty decent. I did, subsequent to that, I got mail sent to the publisher, forwarded to me, asking me to serve as a lawyer in certain cases. And I always wrote back to these people saying, thanks, I'm glad you feel that way. Would you mind if I go to law school first? And that's about where it stayed. But it was a wonderful experience, and it was just a wonderful time. In terms of the Kennedy case, following Oliver Stone's movie, and just in general.
What was a catalyst? Why did you write the book? What spurred you on? Because you have to do an awful lot of research and know the topic to decide you could actually write this. I mean, it's one thing for me to think, I should make a movie one day and I should do this, but geez, how many pages is this? I don't know.
It's 650. It's 652 pages.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. 652.
What I remember best was as I went through the 26 volumes the first of 6 times, I was reading things and I said, if that ever got into a courtroom, and I started hearing that phrase again and again. So one night I said to my now ex-wife of 20 years, I'm going to try and do the Trial of Oswald. And she just said it's the most hideous idea she ever thought of, probably next to marrying me. And I said, well, suit yourself. You don't have to help me with it. And I came upstairs to my office, and I just from scratch picked 2 witnesses. One was Cecil McWaters, the bus driver, who was a minor witness, and the other was Captain Fritz. And I just wrote, the prosecution asking them questions, the defense, countering those questions, inconsistencies. Did it in about 2 hours, typed it up, printed it out, took it downstairs, says, here, how hideous is this? And she looked at it and said, whoa, this is great. And then that's where it was born. But I didn't do anything more for about 6 weeks because I was teaching and coaching, and I would get home about 7 o'clock every night. So once the coaching ended, the day the coaching ended, I started. And that was middle of November of 91, and I finished it towards the end of January of 92. It took 10 weeks. But it wrote itself. That's the only way I can describe it. I just typed.
Well, it writes itself if you know the facts of the case, right? And
yes.
And it's hard for me to call them facts, but what is presented, like you mentioned, the concept of the Warren Commission. You go, like even in Jim Garrison's movie, he can't believe they've moved on. Or some of the questions. Now, is there anything that we didn't already previously talk to you about that you would like to add? No. Okay. Dismissed, right? So they talk to the guy in the hallway, they bring up a few things, then they get in front of the commission, the stenographer, and they just overlook so many things.
Well, there's a couple of things there that you listeners might not be aware. For one thing, many of the witnesses were pre-interviewed. And if they didn't pass muster, they did not appear as witnesses. And two of the classics in that case were Siebert and O'Neill, who were the two FBI men at the autopsy. Our inspector interviewed them for the purpose of having them testify before the Warren Commission, and they didn't. They left there saying this guy's some kind of clown and we're not going to do it. And the inspector didn't want them on the record either. The other thing, and this is what I really found odd, I always thought the stenographers held the key to a lot of what the Warren Commission put out there because it's too clean in a couple of ways. In 10 million words in the Warren Commission volumes of testimony, the 10 million words of testimony, there aren't 5 words that George Carlin would have uttered in a monologue. And I thought, that's kind of strange, because people speak English every day. Secondly, when I read the AARB depositions that Jeremy Gunn took, there were an awful lot of instances where he would ask a question, and it seemed like a straight-up question, and the witness would say, I'm not really sure what you're asking me. Could you rephrase that or put it in other words? And regardless of whether it was just a basic witness or a hostile witness like Colonel Pierre Fink, regardless of who it was, Jeremy Gunn would say, sure, here's what I'm trying to find out. Did you see or hear blah, 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 whatever. And then he'd say, oh, I understand what you're asking me. Okay. And he'd give the question. I went back in my mind to the Warren Commission, and I only think that happened twice in 488 witnesses. But it happened repeatedly in a handful of witnesses in front of the AARB. And I said, ARRB, something's wrong. Those testimonies were cleaned up. They were sanitized. So I started hunting around for who the stenographers were, and the one I found the most often was somebody named Odell Oliver. And I did some digging, and I found out that Odell Oliver was normally the court clerk of Judge Sarah T. Hughes, who swore in LBJ. And I said, that's too much of a coincidence. Just too much of a coincidence. So, again, there's concepts that we talked about, and then there's some sub rosa things happening that you just don't know. And I have no hesitation in saying, and I would have said it to all Inspector's face when he was alive, I know without hesitation that when people came into that room, he told the stenographer to go have a cigarette, and he said, hi, so-and-so. Hi, Mr. Osanek. I'm glad you could come in because this is, after all, a matter of national security, and what you're going to tell us is very important. Now, when we go on the record, I'm going to ask you about the 3 shots you heard in Dealey Plaza. School's out. If it's a matter of national security and the guy running the national security show just told you the answer to the question, there's no reason in answering the question. One witness, a guy named Ronald Fisher, was asked, how many shots did you hear? And his answer was, 1 more than was fired. That's the dead giveaway. So all of those things made turning these Warren Commission people that are like mannequins in a front store window, turning them into real people was easy. And just taking what they said and saying, wait a minute, you said such and such. Can we go back to that for just a minute and revisit it? And you'd be surprised well, you know the story. And at the end of the day, there was no case. What hung Oswald out to dry was they caught him in the theater close to where Tippit had been killed. As far as John F. Kennedy, they had no case. Nothing. Less than nothing. And Jesse Curry knew that.
In your trial, which you mentioned there's only going to be 2 days in Houston coming up, but your trial starts off with, by the way, there doesn't seem to be a table of contents. I was going to go through various chapters. Well,
yeah, no, there was, it was not something I intended, simply because I just wanted it to flow. I didn't want people to go to places in advance. I want to see what so-and-so says. No, just start with page 1 and go. It started on January 5th of 1965, which was a Tuesday. And when I was writing it, I picked that day because that was the day. That was the day that I started going out with the captain of the cheerleaders in high school. So it was a day I remember very well. I knew Tuesday, January 5th, 1965, after Oswald had been shot by Ruby and in a coma for a year. After he recovered and went on trial, it was January 5th of 65. And my trial took, I think, till the end of January, day by day. And that was pushing it. That was putting aside some very fine technical points where an attorney might say, I'd like the jury removed because I don't think what this guy's going to say is relevant. So I'd like to have the jury removed and ask the questions, and if Your Honor decides it's relevant, we'll bring the jury back and we'll do it. That kind of stuff I tried to weed out for purposes of time and pages. Because those things do happen in a courtroom. Lawyers have a way of doing everything but getting to the point in most cases. But just as far as what they had nothing. They had absolutely nothing. And looking back on it now, if I was going to do it again today, which I'm not, I would probably do it exactly the same. I might do some other things, other Kennedy stuff that I've done differently. But that one, the evidence is the evidence. And what evidence is there? What was Oswald's motive? Well, he was a communist. He wasn't, but his distinction between what he was and a communist wouldn't have been understood by almost anybody.
Well, he was an intelligence asset. I mean, his defection was, paid for and met with money. But let's get back to a little bit of the trial early. Tell me, how did you pick the defense attorney for Lee Oswald, and what are the characteristics that you were looking for?
It's me. I picked myself. I just gave him another name. I had done Mystery Murder in 1981, and the main character in that Mystery Murder was Eddie Barnes. So I just said, hey, I liked Eddie Barnes in that one. I'm going to just use him again. And basically, it's me. And I've done 3 detective novels since I finished the chronology and the Kennedy execution, and they've been published. And they're a series of Chris Decker novels, and I'm Chris Decker in those. But all I wanted was somebody fast on their feet, fast Eddie Felson, from the Paul Newman movie. Somebody fast on their feet, somebody that had the facts on his fingertips and could outthink somebody that was plotting based on an empty case that the Warren Commission handed him. Because in the book, Warren Commission exhibits are used for reference. But they're just listed as exhibit. Warren Commission Exhibit 1 is the Walker letter that Oswald supposedly wrote but didn't. When you mention Oswald as being, having his way paid and all, when I went to Russia to retrace all of Oswald, I went through Helsinki. So it was an adventure. When Oswald was finally sent to work, what did the factory produce where they sent him in Minsk? Do you remember?
Radios? Was
yes.
it an AM radio factory? Yeah.
Yeah, but that same factory also produced experimental radar. What was Oswald's job in the Marines? Radar operator.
Yeah, he worked at Atsugi.
Yeah, I don't think he knew enough to tell them anything whatsoever. I think, and I've always believed, the Russians sent him to that place to let us know that they knew who he was and what he was, and they were putting him on a leash. We know what you sent us. You sent us some idiot that worked in radar. We're putting him in a radar plant. Hit us with your best shot. And he never learned Russian. When he worked in that factory, when it was break time, the guys would tell jokes in Russian, and Oswald would listen, had no idea what was being said, and when everybody else laughed, he laughed. And there are a number of people that crossed Oswald's path in Russia. Said, this, how good was his Russian? He never spoke Russian. And I think about all the times when Oswald made public utterances. Never did he speak Russian. And one thing we know about Lee Oswald, he loved to show off. He loved to be the center of attention. When the cops had him in the DPD, it's unimaginable that he didn't break into speaking Russian to them and let them know, hey, look, you're a bunch of flatfoot cops. You don't know anything. I'm multilingual. You're not. There is no recording anywhere that I know of where he ever spoke Russian. And I've had people look who were absolutely fluent in Russian, read his Russian writings, and tell me that they're perfect. But yet, you and I both know, and every one of your listeners knows, that Oswald's English was atrocious, spoken and written. His spelling was beyond horrible. And there was one document that I was not aware of when I did People v. The Warren Commission sent copies of Oswald's English to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and that's a highly, highly decorated medical institute. And they said, can you explain what's with this guy's written English? And what they came back with, and they sent the report back on September 10th of 1964, right shortly before the Warren Commission was already in galley proofs. And it just happened that was my 17th birthday, and it was the day I got to drive. The Mayo Clinic on September 10th, 1960, sent back a report saying the reason you get Oswald sees the word independence, and when he tries to write it, he writes independence. He sees the word opinion, and he writes opion, O-P-I-O-N. And they said the problem is, and they gave some technical name to it, but he can't grasp the full field of what he's seeing. Well, the reason you never saw that in print was if he can't grasp the full field of a word like opinion, how is he going to grasp the full field of a moving target 265 feet away? And the reality is, it's impossible.
Well, maybe a better analogy would be Russian language. I mean, Russian language is it's not very user-friendly.
Oh, no, it's not. I mean, I learned enough to try to get by. And when I was with people over there, half of them could understand me and half of them had no idea what I was saying because of dialects. But when I gave people who were fluent Oswald stuff to read, they said this is better than 95% of the Russian people could do. Oswald's written Russian. And there are certain little keys in Russian that we don't have in English. They have a letter that goes after a consonant. And if you write the letter D in Russian and you put this letter after it, the D becomes a T. It softens the sound. There's an alternate version of that hardens the sound. We don't have those things in English. And they've got letters and they've got an SH, a CH. They have SHCH, like in Khrushchev. I mean, Khrushchev's name in Russian is 6 letters. It's just totally different, and he could have never mastered it. He could have never gotten close to it, much less attained perfection. But there it is. He did it, and it's perfect. And all of those are good reasons why he didn't stick around long enough, because anybody putting him on trial would have said he's going to testify on his own behalf. Mr. Oswald, please write the Gettysburg Address in Russian. He couldn't have gotten past 407, and it would have made the whole thing out to be the farce that it was. But he didn't live long enough, so he went on trial. On my pages, somebody else did something like that, but not tremendously comprehensive. And it's been done since then. Somebody sent me a copy of something, I'm going to say about a year ago. And it was the Trial of Oswald. And it was just penetrating glimpses of the obvious. I don't know the name of the person, and if I knew it, I wouldn't say it to bring them into any kind of disrespect. But it's been done, and as far as I'm concerned, case closed.
Yeah, exactly. Now, for people who haven't read the book, let's just get into the chapter 1, the opening statements from the defense and the prosecution. You talked about the Walker letter. There's so many things like the rifle and what are a couple of things that you thought would be sticking out that the prosecution would try to hold against him?
Well, I've never read any of my books, so I don't remember exactly what was said. But when I'm making the opening prosecution argument, I'm going to say a man was cited as a sharpshooter in the Marines. He owned this rifle. There were fingerprints on it. How much more do you need? But the defense attorney is going to say, ladies and gentlemen, when that rifle is put on the stand, you're going to discover that that's not the rifle that Mr. Oswald purchased, and it's not a rifle that Mr. Oswald ever collected from the post office box, because it was ordered by someone named Heidel, and the rifle that was ordered was not the one that was found in the book depository. And the money order allegedly used to pay for that rifle was a $21.45 money order. It was part of a $13,000 bank deposit by Klein's Sporting Goods in Chicago. And it was never essentially received as part of a deposit. Technically, it was in there because it was in the period of sales. But that money order to this day is pristine. It never got stamped by anybody. And I would have added, you will also find out what sharpshooter really translates to, because the Marine officer who had Lee Oswald's Marine Corps scorebook using an M1 rifle was asked, how would you characterize Lee Oswald's marksmanship? And Colonel Allison Folsom of the U.S. Marine Corps said, a rather poor shot.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I think, isn't it 189, the score that you were bounced on, and he only had a 191?
Yes. Well, that was one firing. Yeah, they would bid you farewell on a 189, and he got a 191. And the Marine scuttlebutt always was that they would give you the 191 just to keep their round, regardless. They wouldn't even if they're looking at your target through the telescope and they realize this guy's doing lousy, hey, you got a 191. The sharpshooter thing, I think, was 230 or 212. Excuse me, 212. Because you're a marksman at 190, you're a sharpshooter at 210, and you're an expert at 230. The document that makes him a sharpshooter has strikeovers where it said MM, meaning marksman. So it meant whatever score he actually got was digitalized out of that thing, and they made him into a sharpshooter and crossed out the marksman designation. And that's as close as it got. The Marines that were on the firing range with him, you know the story, Maggie's drawers. And he couldn't hit things. Why? Because he couldn't see the full field. And it will be extremely interesting to see if that Mayo Clinic document ever comes to light, because that just blows the whole thing out of the water.
Can you talk about that document for people who don't know about it?
Well, they looked at Oswald's spelling, and they said he can't see the full field of some words. And there were people who said Oswald was dyslexic. Dyslexia is having difficulty reading. Dysgraphia is when you have difficulty writing and you make reversals. You write the letter B instead of the letter D. You write Q instead of P. That wasn't Oswald's problem. He simply could not grasp the full field. And everybody said, Oswald was a bookworm. Of course, I always wondered if he was a book depository worm. But I think the reason he kept his nose in a book as often as he did was to give the impression that he wasn't visually handicapped in brain functioning. Because if you can't see the full field of a word, you're not going to see the full field of what you're shooting at, whether it's a target 200 yards downrange or it's an individual riding in a limousine at 265 feet. It's just not going to happen.
Okay, now, as a defense attorney, what are some of the things that you wanted to bring up and discussed in your book?
Again, going back to the opening statement, I'm going to say, the prosecution has told you some wonderful things. I would like everybody to raise their hand when they put an eyewitness in that chair that says, I saw Lee Oswald in the window. Because you know what, folks? It's not going to happen. Nobody saw that man at the defense table in that window that day. Nobody. You can hear all kinds of stories. There were 600 people in Dealey Plaza. Nobody saw him. Nobody came forward and said, I saw him. And that's critical. That was one of Jesse Curry's biggest problems with the whole thing. I would then make a point of saying when the Texas homicide case was taken from Texas to Washington, and essentially it was never returned. Well, Oswald's dead, school's out, we're not sending back the stuff you sent us. When they, Saturday morning about 6 a.m., the FBI laboratory was up and running, just waiting for whatever was coming in to come in, they immediately got their hands on a rifle. And they couldn't find any fingerprints on the exterior surface. When they took it apart, they found a partial palm print underneath a part of the barrel, but that palm print wouldn't have been seen when the gun was assembled in one piece. The gun was clean. And the Warren Commission asked the FBI laboratory major domo, Sebastian Latona, and you can just tell from the way the tone of the wording goes, you couldn't find any fingerprints on that? And Latona just looked at him and he said, it's a cheap old gun. But the Warren Commission found an expert, some major from somewhere under the sticks, Wyoming, that came out and testified, oh yeah, it's as good as any weapon the United States Army buys. Of course, we were paying $200 per rifle at that time, and the Mannlicher Carcanos were selling for $3 wholesale because they're junk. I owned one. And when the FBI tested it for its accuracy, they put it in a bench vise, the kind of thing you have in your workshop where you put a piece of wood in and it's not going to move, so you can make a perfect cut on that piece of wood. They bench vised that gun with it sighted in on a crosshairs 15 yards away. That's 45 feet. They fired it. The shots were always high and to the right. The Warren Commission, in the report, explained that was an advantage to the shooter because the car was moving down and to the left. So the aiming point going high and to the right helped somebody shoot somebody going down and to the left. If anybody in your audience can figure out the logic to that, please ask them to get in touch with me, because it makes no sense whatsoever. But the gun could not be accurately fired, even when the FBI put shims under the telescopic sight. Essentially, that gun was never designed to have a telescopic sight on it. It was a mass war weapon. There's 10,000 guys over there, there's 10,000 guys over here. Fire into the crowd, you're going to hit somebody. It's not a sniper gun. I would have introduced into evidence the page that the order came from. And I would have asked the jurors, please tell me what it says about this gun up here. Oh, it's an excellent gun. It's NRA, blah, blah, blah. This is a great thing. What does it say about this gun over here? Oh, highly recommend it. And it costs, $112, whatever. What does it say about this thing down here? Nothing. What's it called? Mannlicher Carcano. What's the price? $12.95. It was the orphan on the page that it was advertised on. And it had to be a wannabe's gun, because you would no more put a telescopic sight on that gun than you would put a CD player on a unicycle. It just makes no sense.
And then if you look at the gun in the advertisement, it's not the same length as the gun that was in evidence.
That's exactly correct. The gun that was ordered is not the gun that was found. The gun that was ordered would have fit in the alleged paper bag. The gun that was found would not, because there was a difference of 8 inches. And the only two people, actually there was, no, two. The only two people that ever saw the package were Wesley Frazier and his sister Lennie Mae Randall. Both of them said it was a little bit more than 2 feet. And in one case...
You're talking about the curtain rod package.
Yeah. In one case, I said, well, hold out your hands. How big was it? And I think it was Wesley Frazier that held out his hands, and they measured it, and it was 28 inches. And he said, and it fit right over there on that part of the seat. And he was driving a 53 Chevy, which is a small car, and had the bump in the middle of the seat where the differential went underneath in the old days. And he said it was over there in that corner. You can't put a 34-inch package without crossing over that, seriously crossing over that bump in the middle. And just to add intrigue to it, where did Wesley Frazier work beyond the Texas School Book Depository? He worked selling curtain rods in a notions shop. Just like the person, the constable, Seymour Weitzman, that identified the gun that was found as a Mauser, he'd worked in a sporting goods shop for years selling rifles. If it looked like a Mauser, the easiest thing the Warren Commission could have done was to put the Mannlicher Carcano and a Mauser and photograph them together and let the public say, oh, yeah, I could see how that could be a confusion, but they didn't do it. And you have to ask why. And the other thing, how does somebody named Heidel collect a rifle from a post office box owned by Lee H. Oswald exclusively for the use of Lee H. Oswald? Nobody else could collect mail there. Yet it happened. And
well, they said it happened, right?
Yeah, they said it happened.
Right.
I mean, for the sake of official argument, it happened. It multiplies exponentially with respect to the gun, the pistol. That thing was sent Railway Express to a post office box. And Railway Express could not in those days deliver to post office boxes. Only U.S. Postal Service could deliver to a post office box. You had to put 50% of the price when you ordered it. It was a $30 gun. Oswald allegedly sent $10. That's not 50%. They sent it, supposedly, Railway Express to his post office box, COD. Who paid for it? It's not like they're going to put it in the box and say, oh, Mr. Oswald, this is a COD, you got to pay. Before it goes in the box, it would have gotten paid for if it was, let's say, U.S. mail. Because it simply wouldn't go in a post office box. If it went to your house, they knock on the door, say, I got a COD for you. You going to pay for it, or I did take it back? But yet it wound up in a post office box with nobody paying the COD, Oswald paying less than he was supposed to pay, and it went from Railway Express to a post office box. That's bizarre. Only in the last couple of years can FedEx or UPS or those kind of services deal with postal boxes, but not in 1963. Not a chance. But anything can happen in the world of Lee Oswald. And in a sense, almost anything did. Because whatever the requirement was, he made a point of doing something different. If the requirement was 50% of the cost, $15 for the pistol, he sent 10. When he filled out his first passport application, at a time he was getting a hardship discharge to take care of his mother, which was bogus. There was no proof of any hardship. She kept changing jobs, and when she got to the new job, she said, "I want a physical exam because I think I have a hardship." And every doctor that looked at her said, "There's nothing wrong with you, honey." When he filled out his first passport application while waiting to be discharged on 9/11 all days, and I think he got the early discharge so he could get to Russia before it got really cold, so he could find his way around. But he put his mother's birth date and his father's birth date and filled out the names. When he went for the second passport, after the defection, when he was given his original passport back at the embassy, it was stamped for travel to the United States only. And once he got on the shores of the United States, that thing essentially got shredded, or should have been. When he went for a second passport in New Orleans, his father's date of birth changed, his mother's date of birth changed, and he spelled his mother's last name wrong. His maiden name, Clavery. Nobody picked it up. Again, Oswald gets away with it. If I got to renew my passport in the next 30 days, or it goes up the chimney, if I get a comma wrong on what I send in, they're going to bounce it. But not Lee Oswald. And after a defection, I'm sure, again, you and a lot of people listening have seen the page that Oswald's name is on for passports. And over on the right-hand side, it says N.O. Well, what does that stand for? Well, they said it stood for New Orleans because that's where he applied. Why is there nothing listed along those other people on the same page? It was a paper trail. And for all the noise about Sylvia Duran in Mexico and Kostakov in Mexico City, in the Cuban embassy and in the Soviet embassy, was him wanting to go to Cuba and then to Russia. It's all rubbish. If you want to travel to Russia, as I did, you go to the Soviet, or in my instance, it was Russia then. I went to the consulate of the Russian Federation, which is in Midtown Manhattan. The embassy is elsewhere. Embassies do not issue travel documents. The Cuban embassy couldn't, the Russian embassy couldn't, but that's where he's batting around, trying to get travel documents. And they could have just said to him, "We don't issue such things." But you get no sense of that in reading the existing narrative. You get no sense of it whatsoever.
Now, what do you make of the stories? It's almost folklore that Oswald was in Mexico, yet the photos don't match. They just, a bus ticket, a name that's been added in for the baggage, and
amazingly enough, Priscilla McMillan Johnson goes to visit Marina just when the Warren Report is coming out, and happens to find tickets to a Mexico City bullfight in Ruth Payne's, in a TV guide that belonged to Ruth Payne. Now, why in September 1964 Ruth Payne would have kept an old TV guide from the year before is unimaginable. And Priscilla McMillan is unique in that in the entire spectrum of the Kennedy story, from the time he started running for president until well after the Warren Commission was done, he was the only one person, only one American was ever expelled from the Soviet Union, and it was Priscilla McMillan. And that should tell us a world of information. By the same token, Marina could not go to the U.S. consulate and get travel papers to the United States because the United States and Russia did not have mutual reciprocal deportation agreements. We could not deport somebody to Russia. They could not deport somebody to the United States. So the plan was she was just going to leave there empty-handed and pick up her travel papers in either the Netherlands or Belgium. They made an exception, and the rule was Rule 243, Paragraph G, and she got her travel documents in Moscow to come here. Again, in every instance, the exception is made. I mean, as an intelligence asset, as you noted earlier, of course he was. But what kind? Was he real, or was he just cannon fodder so the Russians were watching him while some decent spy was wandering around getting information? The Minox camera. The Dallas cops find a spy camera in Oswald's sea bag. And the FBI says, no, it's a light meter. And they said, no, it's a camera. Please, for the sake of keeping this simple, list it on the evidence thing as a light meter. No, we're not going to do that. It's a camera because we took the film out of it and we had it developed. And it showed stuff in Russia. And I'm not talking about accidental tourist stuff. Oswald was physically present for the trial of Gary Powers. You can see him in the picture. And he sticks out because he's the only person in that huge hall that's not wearing a suit. He's wearing a sweater from one of the pictures of him and the boys in Moscow. And he's a dead ringer. The problem is you can't travel from Minsk to Moscow just for the sheer hell of it. You have to have permission. They catch you walking around Moscow. Papers, please. Oh, you're from Minsk. You're under arrest. You're not supposed to be here. And there he is in the middle of the Gary Powers trial. And he wrote a letter to his brother saying, yeah, Powers looked like a decent fellow when I saw him in Moscow. He should have never seen him, but he did. Again, the exception. And as soon as when Powers came down on May 1st, and that's a whole story in itself, when Powers came down on May 1st, that was the kickoff for Oswald joining the hunting club at the radio factory, because he was afraid for his own safety because an American had committed this espionage. That allowed him to purchase a shotgun. Rifles are verboten in the old Soviet Union of 1960. You could not own a rifle, simply because of what happened in Dallas on November 22nd. That's not going to happen with a shotgun. So Oswald went out and got himself a shotgun. Went with the hunting club. Never shot much of anything. And before he left Russia, he smuggled the thing under his coat to a pawn shop and got 18 rubles for it. And also making available to the jury, Oswald last fired a rifle in the Marine Corps on May 8th of 1959. Despite intense, and I mean probably 25,000 man-hours devoted to it, despite intense investigation into the travels of Lee Oswald, the FBI could not put a rifle in his hands for the sake of practice, ever. So we're asked to believe that from May 8th, 59, to November 22nd, 1963, he never fired a rifle. He's got a cheap old gun that's badly sighted. He was a rather poor shot. He can't see the full field, but yet he made 2 miracle shots. And anybody that knows anything about guns will tell you at least 2 important things. One, it requires intense practice. If you're going to be good with a weapon, you got to practice. It's not softball where you put the bat down in September and pick it up in April and start hitting line drives. You got to practice. 2, the gun has to be sighted in, and that can take anywhere from 10 to 12 shots. Before you go hunting, you go down to the rifle range, aim at the target, you fire. You thought you hit the target right in the middle, but it came out high, so you adjust the sight a little bit. You try it again. After 10 or 12 tries, that thing will hit where you aim it. Oswald supposedly put the gun together in the book depository. We don't know what he used for tools, but he built the gun in the book depository. We don't know when, we don't know where, we don't know how, but that's what he did, allegedly. And it damn sure wasn't sighted in because he didn't fire 12 shots for practice. How do you do it? The reason they have those gun racks in everybody's pickup is to keep the gun steady so it doesn't get out of whack from being sighted in. That's the whole purpose of having it. It's not to make your truck better than somebody's truck who only has fuzzy dice. And all of those things just come crashing down. On top of the fact that Oswald had no apparent motive for doing this. What was known about his thoughts on President Kennedy was that they were positive. And then somebody develops an idea, and it winds up on the cover of Time magazine in 1988, that Connolly might have been the target because Oswald was furious about his discharge from the Navy. He was in the Marines, but he's overseen by the Navy. He did not get a dishonorable discharge. He got a less than honorable discharge. And supposedly he made a lot of noise about it. And Connolly, having been the Secretary of the Navy, would seem like, well, he's a guy that did Oswald wrong. He wasn't Secretary of the Navy when the stuff happened to Oswald. And the reason for the discharge was Oswald didn't go to the reserve meetings because he was in Minsk and not somewhere in Texas where he would had a 3-year obligation to go to reserve meetings. And if he wanted to kill Connolly, he could have done it a whole lot easier than firing a rifle on November 22nd with all the security around. And the final thing you put in the minds of the jurors is, imagine you're setting out on a rainy Friday morning to kill the President of the United States with a rifle. Imagine for a moment that you succeed or fail. Doesn't matter. You fire shots. What's your getaway plan? Let's see. You own a pistol, but you don't take it with you that day. You can't drive a car. We'll get back to that in a minute. You get on a city bus going into traffic, which you wind up having to get off because it was going nowhere. And it was quickly searched by police. And not for nothing, but the bus that Oswald got off, when it finally made its last stop at the end of the line, J.D. Tippett was sitting in his police cruiser at a Glocko station at that bus stop, waiting for Oswald to get off the bus. When Oswald didn't get off that bus, Tippett went out of that place like a bat out of hell. And eventually, drove to his own execution within 20 minutes. American kids, I can call them kids now, they know how many days it is until they can drive an automobile. Yeah, 2 weeks and 6 days, and I can drive. And the day they're old enough, they start driving. That's the American tradition that I know. And I've never heard it told any other way. In Russia, younger people start to drive in their 20s, 20, 24, 25, 26. Before that, they don't. And again, talking to people in Russia, how old are most kids when they start to drive? 24, 25, 23. There's Oswald. I mean, driving a car is a rite of passage in the United States. He couldn't. Ruth Payne said he had trouble figuring out how to get the thing to work. He was a klutz. He got fired from Jagger's Child Stovall because he couldn't make prints the correct size, and they had to be almost perfect. Well, that's an interesting story, but more interesting is that Jaggers Child Stovall had a top security clearance because they made maps for Army intelligence of the entire world. But what they put on the maps was Russian lettering, the Cyrillic alphabet. And I'm thinking, who are they making these maps for? If you're going to give them to guys in the Pentagon, you want them in English. Unless they're going to be taken into Russia by God knows who and used in Russia with Russian writing on them, which would make Jaggers Child Stovall essentially a spy agency. And Oswald worked there. And every person that you could name that was an employer of Lee Harvey Oswald was a right-wing fanatic. The guy in the book depository, Roy Truly. Stovall, to Jag when Oswald was younger. Riley Coffey, good God. I mean, they were all the poster boys for being to the right of Genghis Khan. And how does a guy who would make a point of sitting in the lunchroom reading a Russian newspaper and call everybody comrade, how does he survive more than an hour? I don't have the answer for that. But a jury would. And that was the beauty of People V to me.
Well, right. Let's get back to that. How did you come up with a summation to the jury? Like, what are the things that you wanted to?
Well, it was just a matter of going back and saying, all right, there's a guy sitting here. They haven't told us why he's sitting here. They haven't, they didn't show an atom of hatred for the man he allegedly killed or dislike. He liked what the guy was doing, civil rights, what have you. There's no proof. He fired a rifle for 1,659 days. And that only guarantees that if he fires the gun up in the air, the bullet might come down. That's his best shot. We have the records from a colonel in the United States Marine Corps saying this guy's a rather poor shot. We have the records from the FBI laboratory saying it's a cheap old gun. We have a gun bought by Heidel that is not the gun on that evidence table. And you have not seen one person on the witness stand saying, I saw this man in that window with a weapon. Nobody even saw him in the window without a weapon. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, where's the case? Where is it? Did I miss it? That's all you would need. You could embellish a little bit, but the drama helps to sell it. There's no doubt about that. A good criminal lawyer has got to be dramatic. And for anybody that doesn't know me, I wanted to be an attorney. I had scholarships to several law schools when I was finishing my undergraduate stuff. I graduated college on a Saturday. I was hired by the Justice Department, possible deferment, on a Monday, and I was drafted on that Wednesday. So in a period of 4 or 5 days, everything got turned upside down, and I never got to law school. But the lawyer in me had a ball doing that book. I mean, it was just fun. And, as I said, it got excellent reviews from law reviews. When Carolyn Graham said they were going to publish it, I got a little bit of a tingle in the spine, and I said, what do you think is going to happen when lawyers read this book? And they told me, we're lawyers. The 3 people that agreed on that book all have law degrees. Oh, okay. Fine. Now I'm not worried. Granted, it was simplified law. But it was real law. You can't get away with parroting the Warren Commission. Put your money where your mouth is. And sometimes, the joke that I put in was the neutron activation analysis, where the guy says, yeah, we found a piece of a bullet fragment and we hit it with neutrons, and it proved to have the same composition as a batch of bullets that Oswald's bullets might have come from. So on cross-examination, I went up and I showed the guy a quart of milk. I said, what is this? He said, it's a quart of milk. I showed him a second quart of milk. I said, what's this? There was an objection, and I said, a little latitude, Your Honor. So the guy said, that's a quart of milk. I said, okay, you've identified both of these objects. Did they come from the same cow? And in my thinking, that took the wind right out of the whole neutron activation analysis thing. Just drama, but fun to do. Absolute fun to do. And they liked it so much at Carroll and Graf that before I left the first day, they handed me contracts for 2 follow-up books. One was going to be the impeachment and trial of Richard Nixon, which I spent some time with Nixon, and then he died, so I didn't finish that one. And the other one was what became Treachery in Dallas, which was originally had a different title, but it didn't matter. And before I even made the edited things that they wanted glossed over on People V, they gave me the advance for Treachery.
Now let me ask you about that. Was there anything that was asked to be excised, or taken out of the book?
In terms of People V?
Yeah.
No.
Was there anything that they helped coach you with? They said this is a little bit incorrect. You can.
Oh, no. They don't know. Amazingly enough, for all of the sales that Carroll and Graf had, and they published Mark North's book, they published High Treason 2, Harry Livingstone, they published Jim Mars's book, mine, John Newman down the road a little bit. I mean, they published a good deal of Kennedy stuff. For all of that, Kent Carroll and Herman Graf both believed Oswald did it.
Wow. Even after reading your book?
After reading all of those books, after hearing all the arguments, they were simply cash register oriented and nothing else. They would make a rough guess as to how many copies would sell, and that's how many they had printed, and that was it. That was it. Most of the Kennedy assassination books, maybe Mars would be the exception, you don't see second printing. I mean, I've seen Treachery in Dallas, People v. Oswald, and other Carroll and Graf books on Amazon, and it says first edition. Of course it's a first edition. It's the only edition. It's the only one.
I think Jesse Ventura's fared a little better now. He's sold quite a few. But, you know, something you touched on here, how is it that people can look at the facts and not change their opinion on questions about the assassination? I mean, just a couple of days ago when they had the, it's a rhetorical question I'm posing here, but they had Gerald Posner brought out again to talk about these new CIA documents that are going to be released. And he's on there to say, well, look we all know Lee Oswald did it back then, so these documents aren't going to reveal anything. But conspiracy theorists want to look through them, and, the commentator laughs.
He's more of an agent in place than Oswald ever was. At the end of the day, the question you asked right now goes to exactly what's going on with the start of a football game. You know, if somebody kneels down, God forbid, and I know lots of people that are boycotting watching football because what's going on. And somebody said to me this morning, are you boycotting football? I said, no, and I don't boycott the Declaration of Independence either. So what do you mean? I said, what does the Declaration of Independence say? If the government's lousy, you protest and change it. What are these guys kneeling down saying? The government's lousy, we want something changed. Same thing. Well, but there's a time and a place. I said, really? What are they going to do? Kneel down in a pay toilet in Albuquerque?
And it's a football game. I mean, it's a football game, right?
So I said to them, when you enforce patriotism, which is what's being attempted, when you enforce patriotism, when you say, kneel down or you're fired, or kneel down or we're going to take you off the air, whatever, stand up. And so enforced patriotism has another name, and it's called fascism. And beyond that, a lot of what patriotism, I consider myself a patriot. I would like to get all of the essential truths in the United States out in the open. And I'm sure we got secrets going back to the War of 1812 to this day. But if you're patriotic enough, it takes an element of fear away, because these guys that don't salute the flag or anti-war demonstrators or, God forbid, Jane Fonda, they should all be taken out and shot, like this guy who's on trial for desertion. You know, the President of the United States came out and said the guy should go before a firing squad or should be thrown out of an airplane. When the President says that, how does this guy get a fair trial? You know, it's
so funny that he didn't serve, right? What did he have, bone spurs or something? These people always get out of having to serve.
Oh,
and yet
he did serve. He did serve. His tennis game was very good. His serve was good.
Oh.
I mean, come on. Yeah, it was ridiculous. If you can afford your way out, you get out. If you can buy a doctor to write a note, and they certainly could. He has no right. Clinton had no right. None of these guys. Who was the last president that served?
Well, George Bush. Right, yeah.
Happy.
Yeah.
Before him, Jimmy Carter served. Gerald Ford served, in a manner of speaking.
Yeah.
Jerry Ford was the jockstrap officer on an aircraft carrier. And then something happened with the boat, and they put him on shore, and he did the same job. Ronald Reagan was in the Army, but his vision wasn't good, so they had him making propaganda films. Nixon was in the Navy. Lyndon Johnson flew one mission, probably soiled his uniform, and got the Silver Star for screaming, "Get us out of here!" And nobody else on that plane got the Silver Star, but LBJ did, because the other plane that went up with him got shot down by the Japanese. But that was his military service. John Kennedy was a legitimate military hero. And
he knew what war was about. That's why he did everything he could to get out of it.
To prevent it. And I think, in talking about the chronology, I surveyed, I'm going to say ballpark, 100 JFK people that I know well enough to say, hey, listen, help me out with this something. I said, between November 1st of 62 and October 31st of 63, now that's before the assassination, that's a month before, Kennedy's still alive. In that year, what was the most important day in the life of John Kennedy, and what was the most important or significant day in the life of Lee Oswald? And answers varied, but the most common answer for JFK was the day that his little boy died after 44 hours of life. The most common answer for Oswald was the day he got pushed around handing out the leaflets because it put him on the map. Glory be! That happened the same day. Both of those events were August 9th of 1963. And therein is the chronology. And I'm personally convinced that when Kennedy lost that little boy, because he should have had 5 children. He had 2. I am convinced that to the extent that he was anti-war before that, he was much more anti-war after that. And he never wanted to, and this is the current controversy, he never wanted to have to write another letter or make another phone call to a parent to say your son was killed. Because they started the Vietnamese body count in 1962. So it was active on November 22nd, 1963, and of course it grew exponentially thereafter, in spite of Kennedy's signing off on NSAM 263.
What I was getting back to about Gerald Posner, do you have any explanation why reasonable people do not recognize the facts and the importance of this case?
I think that there are reasonable people that simply don't want to know because they don't want their universe turned upside down. You know, we hear the phrase all the time, there's people out there that live paycheck to paycheck, and God bless them. All they want in the world is the stability that guarantees them paycheck to paycheck. They don't want any cataclysms. They don't want that. That's the destroyer of all worlds. So they put up with whatever. There are people that run down the steps of the church. They're there twice a day, every day, because of something they believe. That if don't go twice a day every day, it's going to come undone, and they can't let that happen. So they continue. And it's the same thing. There's all kinds of stuff that I don't think people want to know about. Hey, do you have any idea how much this guy today, the Arizona Senator, Jeff Flake, still not going to run for re-election, his pension for having, I believe, served one term. I could be wrong about that, but I think he served 1 6-year term. His pension is going to guarantee him a very cushy life for life. Hey, do you know how much those guys get paid in pension? I don't want to know. Don't tell me, Walt. I don't want to know. And the all-time pension champ of the world was Jerry Ford, because he was a congressman, a vice president, and a president, and a veteran. And on the Warren Commission. And why was he on the Warren Commission? Hoover had files on him because Ford and another member of Congress maintained a hotel suite to entertain women to whom they were not married. Everyone on the Warren Commission, Hoover had files. Boggs was an alcoholic with all kinds of problems. Earl Warren, infidelity like Boggs. The closest, Dulles, you don't even have to say the name. The closest anybody came to decency was John Sherman Cooper on the Warren Commission. And he was a Republican from Kentucky, I believe. But he and his wife dined with the Kennedys frequently, and in private, he and John Kennedy used to joke that they were related by marriage, because Cooper's wife had been married to a man previously who had at one time been married to the woman that John Kennedy married before Jackie. John Kennedy was married briefly down in Florida in 1947. His father bought an annulment, but it's on the books. And that woman was still alive at age 88 the last time I looked. I don't think she's alive now. So they had the goods on Cooper. Hey, if you step in the wrong direction, we're going to let it know that, Kennedy was married before Jackie. So they bought him too. But they were all bought. And Earl Warren, his father was bludgeoned to death. And they knew he would be extremely sensitive to bloody pictures like autopsy photos or the Zapruder film. And as Earl Warren was shown one picture, and he said he had nightmares for weeks. What? I take Novocaine to get my hair cut, but the autopsy pictures don't give me nightmares. It's ridiculous. But there it is. And as so many people have said, the public bought this lemon. And they don't want the tree shaken. Just let it be. Let it be. And it's tragic. But they got, the people that I would talk to about this have grandchildren. 2/3 of the American public wasn't alive the day John Kennedy was killed. And there are kids out there today, and if you say JFK to them, it's like somebody talking to you and me, Len, and saying, what about Warren Harding? What happened to him? Was he killed? Or did he actually eat something that caused an embolism to kill him? We don't know. Or care. I'm only concerned with JFK. But it's ancient history. And textbooks all print the party line. Because if they don't, they're at risk.
Well, that's a shame. Where can you buy your book anymore? Is it only had the one printing then?
Yeah, no. The only place it exists would be on Amazon or eBay, something like that. I know at one point, the Warren Omission, which was the fourth Kennedy book that I did, was on Amazon for $1,700. And I thought to myself, God, it's a million seller. I got 1 million of them in my cellar. So I put it on Amazon, and I sold about 50 of them for the going price, $30. But it was there for $1,700 as a rare book.
I don't know who makes those. You see these every now and then, $2,900 or something. It's just, I don't know.
It makes the thing attractive. I've maintained for years, if some company came out with designer salt that sold for $4.98 a pound, people would buy it instead of buying Morton salt for 49 cents a pound. It's the same thing. It's the concept. Oh wow, you know how much I paid for this book? This is one of my Kennedy specialties. I paid $1,700 for this book, and the guy he's talking to said, "Yeah, I got it from Walt for $30. So what's it really worth? It's worth what somebody will pay for it."
It should be worth what's in it.
It should be, in the best of all possible worlds.
So tell me, if we could inspire anyone to pick up your book, The People v. Lee Harvey Oswald, what, just in a brief paragraph, how would you summarize what you've done?
Well, I think, and this only came to me after I finished it and it was a book, not when I was doing it. But it occurred to me that, all right, look, here's hard and fast, reasonable argument that Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill Kennedy. Put Tippit aside, and I don't ever want to get into that. If this is reasonable, and I still to this day, 25 years after publication, feel very strongly it's totally reasonable and it's correct. If he didn't do it, damn it, we should want to know who did. And of course, in 1992, that was 29 years after the assassination, not 54 years after. And towards that end, I did the referenced index guide as a book. And the reason I did it, Gerald Posner said he indexed the Warren stuff. Well, I did it too, and I held the book up at a conference. I said, "This is mine. Where's yours, Posner? Here's my index. Took me months to do it. Where's yours?" He didn't do it. One lie makes everything he says bogus. And then when all was said and done, I said, I got to do a chronology. And 32,000 pages later, and my eyesight, I said, there's enough in there to tell me what really happened. And then I did the Kennedy execution. The 6 seconds that saved the military-industrial complex. And I believe in that work, too. I've never put anything out there that I didn't fully believe in. I couldn't.
Well, that's what makes you different than the Gerald Posner.
Yeah, true. Dick Russell had a huge campaign worked up by Carolyn Graff for a book he did, and he withdrew it. He said, I'm not 100% satisfied with it. And I respected him tremendously for doing that. They cut and pasted Treachery in Dallas quite a bit. And you asked me before if they said any changes. And they changed at least one word in Treachery in Dallas. And it was all they had to do. Because I printed the photograph, the autopsy photograph. You can't really tell what it's showing because the scalp has been reflected and, there's a lot of stuff missing. I looked at the landmarks in that picture and I said, in this photograph, you're looking into the back of Kennedy's head, and you can see part of the back of the head, back of the skull is missing. And I maintained that for years and years. Somebody said to me, why did you say you're looking into the right side of the head? I said, I didn't say that. I said, you're looking into the back. The guy got out his copy of Treachery in Dallas, put the picture in front of me, and it says, you're looking into the right side of the head. I said, I didn't write that. They did. Now, what does it all mean? I don't know. They went bankrupt. JFK authors bankrupted Carolyn Graff because Jim Mars sued them. And every person, John Newman, Dick Russell, Mark North, Mars, of course, me, Harry Livingstone, David Lifton for the paperback edition of Best Evidence, every one of us was sent documents from the court. Please answer the following questions honestly. I answered them honestly. Carolyn Graff robbed me blind, and I could prove it. They went bankrupt. They sold themselves to themselves. They're now Skyhorse Publishing, and they're out on the West Coast somewhere instead of being in New York City. And I don't know if Ken Carroll is still active or not.
No, well, it's Tony Lyons runs Skyhorse now.
Okay. I haven't followed it simply because I know their operation, and it was simply cash register oriented. Because at the end of the day, whether it's the music business or the publishing business, the key word is business. If they can sell, if Random House can sell however many copies they sold, And I don't think it was all that many, of Posner's book. Because when it was number 11 on the New York Times bestseller list, it was in the bins for $3. And that tells you something. But they shipped 250,000 copies of that book. And if you ship 250,000 copies of a book, it's a bestseller. Nobody has to buy it.
Right.
You just get it. You just have to get them out there.
And if they don't want to pay for the shipping, because, if you don't sell them and a bookstore orders 12 and they say they didn't sell, we're shipping them back, the company would have to pay for that, right?
Yeah.
So they just say have them.
What they tend to do in a lot of cases is they'll promise the bookseller a deal on a subsequent book. And what the bookseller has to do is tear the covers off the books and just send back the inside, and then it becomes a paperback. Extra copies of People V, the covers were torn off, and it was made into the paperback version in '94. I mean, there was no magic to that. It's the same book. It's just how the business works.
Well, today what we're talking about is The People v. Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's your case, your supposition of what a case would happen with a good...
That book is my little John Benet Ramsey. It really is.
Well, explain that for me. What does that mean?
It's my little beauty, and it was the first time I was on stage. I got to do TV, radio, you name it, because of that book. I got to meet people. I got to learn so much more. But at the same time, that book turned out to be as dead as John Benet Ramsey because Carroll and Greff didn't push it the way they should have. They had a history of printing once a month, and all of their books that were going to be printed in the month of June were done together at Berryville Graphics in, of all places, Langley, Virginia, to save them money. Their books were all jelly beaned together. But if one of their books sold out on the 10th of the month, because people couldn't keep their hands off it, it wasn't reprinted until the 30th of that month. And in the meantime, the interest could be lost, gone away, goodbye, forget it. And I had countless, I went all over doing book signings, and I had countless people tell me, Mr. Brown, if that book had been handled properly, you'd be a millionaire. And I'm not upset that it didn't work out that way. I'm satisfied that the people that read it liked it, the law journals liked it. I got to do another book. From there, I got to do another one, and then finally I was able to sit down and do the chronology. And the outgrowth, which is, since Oswald didn't do it, who did? And that's another story for another time. But
all right.
People can reach me at my email address, which is K as in Kennedy, I-A-S as in Sam, JFK, KIAS JFK at AOL.com. We can go back and forth. I still answer a ton of mail.
All right, good. Well, I hope we can get a few people to read the book, especially while there's other court case in Houston, and maybe there'll be some publicity around it. People will read this as the groundwork.
I mean, I know there's stacks of copies out there on Amazon. I have one copy. That's it. I don't have a copy of Treachery in Dallas. The other stuff I have copies of. The copy of People V that I bought on Amazon for like $2.99, and the guy sends it to me. He says, "Are you the same?" Yeah, that's me. I don't have a copy of my own book, but I do have one copy of it that was signed by about 60 different researchers, eyewitnesses, God knows who, everywhere, everybody from Marina Oswald to Ruby Strippers to Secret Service to Crenshaw to Necheparenko, and that's, there it is. That's a rare book, and it's about 6 feet away.
Okay, Walt. Well, like I
really
said,
appreciate
I want people.
The opportunity to talk with you.
Good.
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. I hope to hear from some of your listeners. Anybody to this day that still cares about JFK is good people, because I will never stop caring. You can make a very solid argument that he was the last American president. and we've had 9 since then.
Okay, well, I'll keep in touch with email, and I'm very interested to talk to you again about some of these other
We'll
projects.
see what kind of reaction we get, and then we can, in the winter, end of the winter or spring, we can do Kennedy execution. Because the trial might just convince the trial, or people going out and getting the book might, and I'm not making any money off the book, so that might just convince them, hey, somebody else did this. But I think most of your listeners already know somebody else did this.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Was this done on a computer at the time?
Yeah, well, yes. I got a computer as a gift for opening a bank account, and it was a 1984 clunker. The total memory of that computer was 55K. So I could type 19 pages of text, and it would stop.
God. Okay. I just want to know if you had a PDF of the book.
No, I don't, because it was on 50 of those truly floppy disks, 20 pages each on 50 disks. And I donated the computer, the little print. I donated that whole thing and the disks to the Conspiracy Museum in Dallas many, many years ago. I don't even know if it's still there. I haven't been in Dallas in 10 years at least. But I donated all of that stuff for the historical. This is the thing that, it's not quite like seeing Jack Kerouac's typewriter, but it's something. You do what you can.
Yeah, I thought maybe we could make it into an audio book, but.
Well, it could be done if I didn't mind reading it all, but it's extensive. It would be a thick audio book, and I don't see the market. I got an email last week. Somebody was trying to get 100 signatures for a petition before it was announced that the files were going to be released. They wanted to get 100 signatures for a petition to release the files. And I said to the person, what is 100 signatures going to do? You can get 100 signatures to ban gladiolas. It's not going to change anything. I said, if you got 3 million signatures, you would have 1% of the American population, and it would be meaningless. And you're not going to get 3 million signatures for JFK, sadly. I don't know if you're going to get 100, but those who care matter, and that's what matters to me. So I really appreciate the opportunity tonight, and I look forward to us getting together again.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing time tonight, Walt.
Oh, glad to, Len.
Okay.
Take care, and best to your audience.
All right. Thank you.
JFK Lancer presents the 24th Annual November in Dallas Conference, November 17th, 18th, and 19th, 2017. Since 1996, JFK Lancer has proudly hosted a yearly conference in Dallas, Texas. Each year, we honor the legacy of President Kennedy and strive to better understand the facts of his assassination. Speakers and guests from all over the globe come together for this exciting event to share the latest findings in the case. This year, 2017, our focus will be on the 3,000 plus government documents that are being released just months before this year's conference. The theme for this year's overall conference will be that of disconnection. The disconnection of the official story from the historical reality. Scheduled speakers this year include Russ Baker, Malcolm Blunt, Dr. Michael Chesser, Andrew Craig, Mary Moorman, Gary Shaw, Jeff Morley, Gary Moore, John Newman, Casey Quinlan, Bill Simpich, Stu Wexler, and many more. For a complete conference schedule, check with jfklancer.com. Ticket price includes sessions by over a dozen speakers throughout the 3-day conference. And there will also be book signings, tons of opportunities to ask your questions, and a remembrance service held at Dealey Plaza. Sunday, after the Dealey Plaza ceremony, Brian Edwards and Casey Quinlan will take you on a charter bus tour of several historic JFK spots around Dallas. Their extensive knowledge, coupled with their highly entertaining style, makes for an exciting and rewarding tour. This tour will fill up fast, so don't wait. The conference is again at the famous Adolphus Hotel. Mention you were with JFK Lancer. So don't miss this year's November in Dallas Conference, November 17th, 18th, and 19th, 2017. For information on ticket prices, speaker updates, and conference details, please visit jfklancer.com. That's jfklancer.com.